Like the reality is we get report cards that have a letter grade and few comments because teachers literally don't have time to
That's
do
right.
more than
That's
that.
right.
And so, like to the defense of teachers there,
Absolutely.
how can we expect more than that?
Absolutely.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So, this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name is Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGrow.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Before we begin, we just want to mention that we continue to relish your feedback. So please drop us a line, say hello, tell us where you are at in the world, and help us be better at what we do. Please send any feedback to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. Dr. Dave, I know today you are bringing the topic, so maybe you want to introduce it and share a little bit about that.
Jump right into this. So I was reflecting back in my Facebook memories. Y'all use Facebook sometimes. I am not on Facebook nearly as much as I used to be.
I am not on Facebook at all.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I'm working my way out of it. But one of the fun things about Facebook is I still get my Facebook memories, and I do kind of like that. But I've been teaching here at Dordt for 10 years now,
Wow.
and my previous job was the technology director at a local Christian school. And part of that role meant I was responsible for printing report cards at the end of each quarter of the year, at the end of the year. And so we're at that part of the year where it would have been 10 years ago, me printing report cards. And I was grinching about the fact that here I am printing all these report cards and all that. And it just got me thinking, I'm kind of curious, I'm wondering, do report cards do what we think they do? Or maybe a better way of framing that is, what's the purpose of a report card?
What do we think they do?
Well, I was just going to ask that actually. Is like, what is the answer to that? Like, and how would parents answer that?
Right.
How would students answer that?
And I would just like to think out loud with you guys a little bit about this, because I think I've shared with both of you before. I've got axe to grind about letter grades, and my whole spiel about letter grades, and the students even know, like, I'm going to rant if I get on the topic about letter grades. I don't think they do what we think they do.
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty ridiculous to imagine we're going to boil down a whole term's worth of learning into one symbol.
Yeah.
Like, what a reductionistic approach, just in general, right? And so that's, traditionally speaking, a big part of report cards is this is where the students are going to get their grade, right? And I just wonder about that. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think about report cards? And can we just maybe dream a little bit even towards better ways of reporting students' learning?
Yeah, like if I right away just think about my own experience with report cards as a student, and I've shared pretty openly, my school was not for me. I struggled with it. And so it was always interesting to me how report cards were just a hard day for me. Like I had to somehow, even at a young age, the compass of shame is pretty big. You know you don't do well in school. You know that most of the people in your class do well in school. So, when they received their report cards, it was a public way with your friends and others to talk, look how good.
Yeah.
Look how good, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, look how good of a student I am. As in, because letter grades are sort of say, this is the kind of student, you're a good student.
Right.
And so for me, it was always a struggle of, how do I save face in this moment, right? How do I act like I don't care? And yet it was also, like I said, it carried a lot of shame of feelings of not good enough. And I need to own some of that, right? I didn't care much for school at that time. And I just sometimes wonder, even now, what do report cards communicate? I think whether we want to admit it or not, one of the things they communicate is sort of somebody's worth, actually, somebody's self-worth. Yeah. Like, because as much as people tend to act like they don't care, they do care on both ends, actually. We care, when we do really well, but I think the students who don't do as well, according to that report card, according to that letter grade, it also brings out feelings of feelings of being not sufficient enough.
Yeah, you're
So
less than somehow. Right?
That somehow you're less than. So at least I think that's my own story, right? Is of sort of like, yeah, this communicated to me that I am not enough. And I sometimes think we forget that.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Abby? What are your sort of initial thoughts?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of my own, just my myriad of experiences, right? School, I was good at school. So report cards for me were affirmation of that, but also I remember like we were talking about earlier, that reductionistic, they also didn't make me feel seen, right?
Oh, sure.
As a learner.
Yeah.
Because they communicated so little.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will still remember individual comments teachers wrote me, right, on papers in college, in high, like that meant so much more to me than those letter grades because they communicated, I've read this, I've engaged with your work, I've seen your work. It was genuine feedback in a way that those letter grades were not for me.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I think about that a little bit. And I as a teacher, I try to imitate that in my own feedback. Grades are necessary, obviously, so I give them, right? We are still in a system that requires it, so you can't separate it from the system we're in.
Correct.
Right? I think as a parent, I don't love to make them a huge, we try not to as parents, have them signify our kids' self-worth, right? We celebrate victories, but that's not, this doesn't say, that's not who you, it's not the whole of who you are, it's not, right? Like, we use it as information, not, not judgment or affirmation. We try not to, but I also would like more information about their learning, honestly.
Yeah, well, right. And I think that, like when I was in middle school and I would get my report card, we actually would like go throughout the day. The middle school I went to, we had a little envelope that we'd pick up in homeroom, and you'd get a card from each class that you were taking. They would like slide them in and like, can't wait to see how this went. And I was a pretty good student, but I was also lazy. Right? Like I'm kind of in between here, I think, when I hear your stories, right? And to just kind of like, can't wait to see what, okay, good. Oh, because I knew I'm lazy enough that it's like I want the A, but I'm going to do the bare minimum that I have to get the A. And so sometimes it's not the A then, right? Like that was my MO through middle school and high school. And so there's that uncertainty. And what you guys are naming about the way we peg worth or value to that, right? Like it makes me wonder sometimes, is this actually, is this about that? Like is this way that we're doing this actually the thing that we care about?
And I always think too, there are some good kids who are just really good at school. Right? Who it's not necessarily a reflection of their learning or their growth as much as it is about their compliance and their ability to churn things out.
This is
right?
Big beef about letter grades in general, right? Like, what does the grade actually mean? Is it a mark of achievement?
And I don't like, and honestly, I had students like this, especially in high school, I feel like more so, who didn't care about the learning, they cared about the grade.
Right. Absolutely right.
And as a teacher, I found myself pushing back hard against that. Right? Don't ask me what you can do to get a better grade. Right? Ask me what you can do to improve your skills.
Right.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. As I was thinking about report cards at the school where I was at, or even as a parent with where my own children were at. I just found it. I just love the qualitative feedback. I think more than anything, and I think part of that was for me is I want to I think there's a letter grade and there's a, we actually went, the school where I was principal at, we went kind of to gradeless report cards in K to 8, and we made that transition. And so one of the things I remember about that, one of the things that made that complex is in talking to some parents, and I get this as a parent, so this is not a criticism, was letter grades was sort of one way for them to connect with their kids, because it was sort of like, hey, I had letter grades when I was a parent.
Sure.
My kids have letter grades. We can talk about this, and it was actually an emotional connection, right?
There's a grand tradition.
There's a grand tradition, honestly, and I right. They don't want that tradition to end, and so there's there's a pragmatic part. We need, how are we assessing learning, and so it's one way to see where our kids are at, I guess, in theory, academically, although what is it really communicating? You know, I think, hey, A means you're doing really good. B means you're doing pretty good. C means there's work to be done.
Yeah.
Now, that's really crass, but I think that's
It's
sort of
also
how,
true.
that's how we sort of,
Yeah.
but I'm also think about, I want as a parent, how are my kids doing?
Right.
Like not, how are my kids doing academically? How are my kids doing now? Now, I just want to share, actually, I found a report card comment, and I won't use anybody's name here, that a teacher used that I've had saved because I found it really wonderful.
Please.
And so think about this. So this is, the report cards were set up here, basically that, hey, like, here you're emerging, or you're not yet there, you're proficient, so try to remove those letter grades. But listen to this, imagine receiving this as a parent. And Abby, I'm just going to put your name in here. At the top, it says deep hope and storyline in the class. You know, like our deep hope is for all to feel loved, be loved, share God's love, and celebrate our growth. So I love that that's being shared with parents. But here's what it says. Under student strengths, celebrations, and personal connections, Abby is a quiet, considerate, and compassionate student. She is such a young lady and is so serene. She loves playing with her friends, and her favorite center was the Dolls restaurant and making up imaginary games. Abby gives of her best at all times and is most diligent with all her online learning. She was excited to share her artwork and journals, which she did so earnestly, using many good sentences and beautiful pictures. She has been a beauty creator with all her colorful drawings. She is creative and put a unique stamp of imagination on her work. Abby's confidence in her messages has been astounding. She even encouraged a friend to start writing in her journal again. Her commitment to her schooling was wonderful to see. God bless you and have a wonderful summer. Now, if I'm getting that as a parent, right? So you can have all the letter grades that you want, but when I see that, then I think my child is known. And sometimes I just wonder, when we just pass out letter grades and there's these canned comments or there's no comments, what do we really know about anything beyond good student, pretty good student, needs work to do student, right? And
I went on a kindergarten field trip with my son this year, and my favorite piece of feedback about my kids that I got all year came from the bus driver, who is my kids' regular bus driver, was driving on this field trip, and he gave me a piece of feedback about my kids that I immediately texted my husband. I treasured in my heart, right? Because it was sincere. It wasn't necessary, but he gave me a sincere compliment about my children.
Wow.
And we need more of that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
That was super valuable to me. It had nothing to do with he has no idea what kind of students they are.
Sure.
Right? It was about them as people.
yeah, yeah. And it doesn't have to be an either or, I guess.
No,
right?
no.
Communicate.
Can we do both?
And I think one of my concerns with report cards, or one of my questions with report cards, is how do we turn report card day into a non-event? Like it's such a big deal. And I just wonder, especially with technology, with different ways to communicate learning, like around Seesaw, right? There's different systems to do that, so that when you actually get your child's report card, there's actually nothing on there that's surprising, because because learning has been communicated along the way. And so basically the report card is a summary of everything you already know, to be true. Right? And that's my wonder, right? It's been such a big event, like, oh, report cards are going, how did you do? It's like, but actually it's actually not a big deal. And that's what I feel like, almost it puts so much pressure on everybody, because it's what we're communicating by making it such a big event is in the end, this is all that matters, when it's actually everything leading up to that day that really matters.
What you said there, Matt, really connected with me too. Thinking about the pressure that it puts on for me as a teacher when I was writing these report cards, and it's like, how is this going to be received? And I know everyone wants to hide behind grades because, then they're objective. They are not objective because a B does not mean a B in different classes. They are not objective, right? So then I want to somehow justify the grade that I'm going to give by writing the comment, but the system that I was part of, like, we weren't writing that kind of nuanced, thoughtful, I see you.
It's a ton of work.
Totally.
And I think we have to acknowledge that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is a ton of work.
But then let's prioritize it. If this is valuable, if this is going to be meaningful, if it's going to build relationships between schools and families, then let's prioritize that work. Let's take other things off of teachers' plates. If that's the thing that we actually want, because I guess that's when push comes to shove. Grades are efficient, right? Like I can scribble grades on a report card. Okay, let's go, right? But that's not the point.
But I also wonder, like when I read that, there is an element of professional development in there. Like you are thinking. So even I think, hey, how do you give a week or two before report cards go home? We're going to have a professional, we're going to give you the time because we value this and we acknowledge that it's a ton of work. We're actually going to give you time.
Yeah.
Like the reality is we get report cards that have a letter grade and few comments because teachers literally don't have time to do more than that. And so, like, to the defense of teachers there, how can we expect more than that?
Absolutely.
Or even physical room.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about the way my kids' report cards are structured. I don't know that there's no space to write that.
Yeah.
Right? Like the system does not allow them to give that kind of feedback.
Right. But
versus face to face.
No, and I guess what I like about that is, again, the school we were at, the mission statement was educating for wholeness.
Right.
How do our report cards allow wholeness for teachers to write them, but also how do they communicate that we know these children as whole beings, right? And so that would be my question for school leaders who might be listening is do our report card, does the format of our report card actually support the mission and the vision of the school? Because
that's the key question.
Because so much of it is sort of like, it's so transactional.
Yes.
You did this, here's the grade, here's the report. We keep going. Well, I just wonder, do our practices actually support what we say we're about? And if they don't, what needs to change for that to happen? It's just one of my wonderings.
And I think part of that is just we accept school as school has always been without thinking about, but why?
We're not trying to reimagine or open up possibilities. It's this is what we do. This is how school works. And it was designed a particular way, and so when it's designed a certain way, you get certain outcomes, right?
What do you think when, Dave, you have talked, openly and passionately about what letter grades communicating and your struggle with them.
Right.
That's a whole nother podcast, but can you just summarize a little bit for you, even just, hey, what is the struggle for you, and how might schools reimagine what that would look like? Because there is a pragmatic part where it's like, hey, if I think about my daughter's got to get into university, universities require letter grades, they require a GPA, so there's a part of it that it's a necessary evil. Maybe it's not that evil, but there's a necessity to it.
Right.
And yet. So I wonder what else could we do?
Sure. So in a nutshell, this is my biggest beef, right? Like I think grades ought to, if we're going to use letter grades, they ought to report achievement. Like they should report what students have actually learned. And where all the waters get muddied is all the other things we roll into what a grade is supposed to do, right? Some teachers use it to track attendance, frankly. Some teachers are grading for effort. Some teachers are grading for, we wouldn't say grading for compliance, but did you jump through my hoops?
Yeah.
That's a lot of times. And all of those things influence achievement. I'm not saying they don't. Like, it's better for kids to be in class than not be in class because attendance does impact achievement. But that's not the point, right? The grade should represent the achievement. So that's my biggest concern about the way grades are generated, right? And how do you separate that? I think that's the harder part to suss out for teachers. So now this is going back a long ways. When I was doing my master's degree, my master's thesis was actually an action research project where I implemented standards-based grading in my middle school science classroom. for a year and just told the story. This is what I did based on the research that I'd done. Here's how I developed it. Here's how it worked. I surveyed the students. I surveyed the parents, and reported the thing. Right? It was this whole study. Part of that was I went to my administrator and said, I don't want to give a letter grade. I'm going to be teaching these standards, and I'd like on the report card for science class to just report students' achievement of these standards.
Yeah.
And I used a 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of a thing, kind of that 1 being just beginning, 2 being developing, and 3 being proficient. Proficient is what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
Some students are going to go beyond just professional, so they have an advanced kind of category. And students right away want to equate that to an ABCD, kind of thing. It's like, nope, we got to reset that.
Yeah.
So I went through that whole process of explaining it to them and working through it. And it took about half the year before most students figured out what this was. That I was really curious and wanting to know about what they had learned, not about did you check all the boxes? Not, it was really about learning. And so I let new evidence replace old evidence and all of that, right? So by the end, I could say the grade at the beginning, you're not going to be doing well because I haven't taught this to you yet. But by the end, you're going to know this stuff really well. And as I said, I went to my administrator and said, I don't want to give him a grade. Well, you got to give him a grade. That's the system we're in. I said, I will plead my case. Who do I have to talk to? I went to the education committee of the school board. Everybody, nope, got to give him a grade. Okay. So then I had a formula for how I would turn my 4, 3, 2, 1s into, and that got to be some arcane math behind that. And that was the problem, right? Because I still had to somehow turn it into a grade at the end. But that was the only time students saw a grade. Yeah. And by that point, they could see the feedback I'd given them and the number scores to say, hey, you're at a 2, and here's what you need to keep working on, right? Give them that kind of specific feedback along the way. So is that the solution? No. Is it a way forward? I think it moved the needle, at least for my teaching practice, to say I want to be a lot more intentional about what I'm doing.
Yeah, I remember my daughter's school did something similar, and initially, in her mind, 4 is an A, 3 is a B,
right.
2 is a C, right?
You have to reset that.
You have to reset it. And I can still remember vividly as they were transitioning. At first she was sort of resistant to it, and just had questions about it. But I can remember one morning clearly her being in the kitchen, and we were just talking about it, and her at one point being able to clearly communicate her feeling less anxious about school and assessments because it felt more about the process of learning rather than the end. And that's my wonder, with report cards, in the end, I'm doing this to get that.
Yes.
Right? And I think for her, and maybe we can never totally eliminate that, but for her it was clear over time that this was more learning along the way than learning to receive something at the end. And I think if we can get students to a place where they feel like the learning is more important than the end result, then I think the end result takes care of itself in some ways.
Because if you're only doing something for a grade, right, then you're teaching them the thing they're doing is not worthwhile in itself.
That's right.
No. Totally.
Absolutely right.
And I totally. And then I think that's where the pressure comes, because it's like I have to do all this to get this at the end.
But actually, the beauty all resides in the doing.
Totally. Yeah. Right. So, but that is 100%. But that's not been communicated to students. Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. Whether it is this day, this week, this month, or this school year, we hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And as you go into this week, we send you with this blessing. To our friends, God go before you to lead you. God go behind you to protect you. God go beneath you to support you. God go beside you to befriend you. Do not be afraid. And may the blessing of God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be upon you. Do not be afraid. Go in peace to love and serve. Amen. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good week.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.
And we're going to have an awkward pause. You're going to end.
No worries. I'll clip this out.
All right. That's awesome.